and this character them. I will say until you get to know them, I think if you had AllenDavis on your program, and I think Matt Parra, was it Matt Parra or Michael Parra? Brother had AllenDavis on recently in the past couple of months. You will.
You think I'm Matt Parra or Michael Parra? I think I'm Michael Parra. I think I'm Michael Parra.
I will say until you get to know them, I think if you had AllenDavis on your program, and I think Matt Parra, was it Matt Parra or Michael Parra? Brother had AllenDavis on recently in the past couple of months. You will see that.
So that's Ryan Day speaking with Pastor James DeValin and Advent Media Connect. I think Ryan Day was trying to say my name. What do you think? You think he was trying to say my name there? I did have AllenDavis on.
I defy anyone within the Adventist community, any scholar, any pastor, any evangelist, to show me where the Bible teaches that at any point a believer will stand before a holy God on his own merits without a heavenly intercessor. The next heretical statement in the passage reads,
views of Adventism.
Oh, absolutely, because
these are very specific views.
There are things, I think there are things that are.
So this was the talk we had, Respectful Riffs, exploring points of difference with Dr. AllenDavis. I'm planning to talk with him again. Now, this is a presentation that I put together in preparation for that first talk that I had with Dr. AllenDavis. But there was so much information in this that I didn't want to depend on this in my discussion with him. I wanted things to flow. But I had this in mind in my talk with him, and so I wanted to present a series, which is what I'll have to do here, because I tried to just record this whole presentation, and it came out in about 4 hours. So I'm not going to do that. But this is the presentation that I put together when I was preparing for that talk that I had with AllenDavis the first time, and the only time, because I didn't speak with him after that. So the topics that we spoke upon, that's what this presentation is about.
Only. Each man will present a main point.
Now, in Dr. AllenDavis's recent video, Dr. AllenDavis, we heard what you said before you deleted it. He put forth a challenge to Pastor Lomacang.
I humbly invite you to a debate on these areas upon which we differ, based upon what you stated. Number 1, the Holy Spirit as a separate being and third person of the Godhead. Number 2, the 2300 days and the sanctuary message. Number 3, the so-called pre-Advent investigative judgment. Number 4, Seventh-day Adventist understanding of salvation. And number 5, the role of Ellen White. John, I will pay my own expenses. I will come to your turf and let you choose the moderator. My intention is to have a scholarly debate using the Bible only.
So when I saw this video, I liked the sound of it. So I commented down here. It's a public comment. And I said, greetings and blessings once again, my friend. It has been a while. And once again, I accept your challenge. I know you are not thinking, I know you are not making it to me, but I accept nonetheless. The only difference I would make with what you put forth is that if it is to be a formal debate, I would like the moderator to do a coin toss to decide who goes first and last. I know you're challenging Pastor John, but if you're willing, I would like to debate you on these matters or to have a discussion like we had on my channel before. Blessings. And so we had a good discussion, Dr. Davis and I, when we had that discussion that I entitled Respectful Riffs. And so once I heard this video of his, I was interested. I liked the sound of what he put forth there, using the Bible and the Bible only to go over those topics. And so we had a little bit of a back and forth there. Again, all of this is public. And so he said, Howdy, I think we discussed most of these areas. Save the third person of the Godhead matter. We could discuss that if you'd like. And I said, yes, we did. Well, it's up to you. I enjoy discussing the Trinity and talking about the Holy Spirit. So, as you said, we can use the Bible and the Bible only to talk about that anytime. Do you want to do it as a formal debate, or do you want to have a talk like we did before? And he said he wanted to debate John Lomacang, but he'd rather converse with me. And so I said, okay, I'll email you blessings. So we've been in communication, and I'm looking forward to our discussion. But because we had a productive interaction last time, of course, we're obviously not agreed on things. Obviously, I'm still an Adventist pastor. I believe in the message. So we had a good talk. So stay tuned, God willing. Hopefully we will. I would look forward to that talk again. And keep the matter in prayer. We are to speak the truth in love and in gentleness and respect to one another. Anyway, getting back to this. This was what I had prepared, and I had been meaning to show this presentation. And so I'm gonna start now. I'm gonna do part one of this, which covers several points. But these are the topics related to the first talk that we had. And so I really wanted to just kind of, like I said, it would have just choked up the conversation if I was just going from one slide to another, and it would have taken too long. So I think I used a couple of these slides in our first talk, but I wanted to show the fuller presentation here. And so this is it right here. God's judgment, the investigative judgment and close of probation. When is the investigative judgment? The cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary. So in Daniel chapter 7, we have three sequences. There are three sequences here that give us a basic rundown. We see the little horn. Then we see the investigative judgment. And then we see the kingdom of God established. We also see the destruction of the little horn. So the destruction of the little horn happens after the investigative judgment. So there you see in Daniel 7, 8 to 14, little horn book. So that's a reference to the investigative judgment. And then destruction and the kingdom of God established. Daniel 7, 20 to 22, the little horn, the judgment, the kingdom. And of course, the little horn is destroyed after the investigation. And then once again in 7:25 to 27. So this is the sequence showing that there is an investigative judgment before the executive judgment and before the kingdom of God is set up, and there is a new heaven and a new earth, and all former things will have passed away. So we see that. Well, in Daniel chapter 8, we see the sequence again, except this time we don't have that court language used, investigative judgment, court, heavenly court language, books open type language, but instead the parallel is the cleansing of the sanctuary. So we have the little horn, the cleansing of the sanctuary, and the little horn broken. And so this shows us that the investigative judgment is the cleansing of the sanctuary. The little horn, Daniel 7, 8 to 14. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes, like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Now, Dr. Davis is familiar with these prophecies, obviously, having such a high position in AFCO and a high position in Adventist ministry. So he's familiar with these. So I don't go into a deep groundwork. I don't go into a deep groundwork in this presentation, but I do have a presentation called Revelation of Light. I have a Revelation of Light playlist where I get into more details. I am planning to put up another series soon, which is the prophecy evangelistic series I'm doing right now in one of my churches, but I didn't want to put it up while I was doing the series because I wanted to try and get as many people to the church as I can. The parakeets are talking in the background. Let me close these doors. Okay, I'm going to continue. So Daniel 7, 8-14. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool, and his throne was like a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. So here we have an image. This is the heavenly court scene, God on his throne. So we have the little horn, we have the heavenly court scene, God on his throne. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. So we have this heavenly court scene. Daniel 7, 8-14. I watched then because of, well, this is verse 11. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So there's an image there. There's a piece of artwork there by R.M. Eldridge, the artist, from Review and Herald Publishing. Okay. So this is depicting the fourth beast of Daniel 7, the fourth beast representing Rome. And then the 10 horns, well, 3 were removed out of the way, but the 10 horns referring to the dividing up of the Western Roman Empire by the Germanic kingdoms, 3 removed out of the way to make way for this strange little horn that would use eyes, well, would have eyes, the eyes representing knowledge, Ephesians 1:18, and the mouth, the words. So this kingdom would have power and use knowledge and words as its power. That's what this kingdom would do. An ecclesiastical kingdom with spiritual pursuits coming out of Rome, a Roman ecclesiastical kingdom, the Roman papal system. Coming up, rising and gaining a spiritual monopoly in the times of Europe, when Europe would come into existence as a result of these Germanic kingdoms, these Germanic tribes carving out the Western Roman Empire, the beginnings of modern Europe, the beginnings of Europe at that time coming into place, the beginnings of the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and the papacy would gain a spiritual monopoly. And so that's what that little horn is representing. Again, I go into more of this in detail in my other series, the Revelation of Light series. But again, this was prepared to really get into my discussion with Dr. AllenDavis, and he would know a lot of these things already to begin with. And so I didn't do a lot of groundwork in this presentation. Daniel 7, 8-14, here verse 13. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And then we see in verse 14, then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So this is the first sequence. And then we see the second sequence here, Daniel 7, 20-22. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell. namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints. So we're dealing with the activities of this horn, the spiritual monopoly gained by this horn, attacking the people of God and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came. And a judgment, and this is the heavenly court judgment, was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. And so obviously the little horn power is destroyed, and all the enemies of God are destroyed before that everlasting kingdom is established and consummated in the new heaven and the new earth. So this is the third sequence, Daniel 7:25-27. Speaking about the little horn, he shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change times and law, that is, times and law of the Most High. This is a spiritual attack of this ecclesiastical power coming out of the fourth beast representing Rome. And then the saint shall be given into his hand for a time, and half time. This is a period of time also repeated in Revelation. Revelation 11, 2 and 3, Revelation 12, 6 and 14, and Revelation 13, 5. This is a period from 538 to 1798. And I get more into this in my Revelation of Light series. But 538 was an important year. One of the things that happened then was that the obstacles of the papal monopoly were moved out of the way. The Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the popular view in Adventism is that the Heruli would be the third horn. I believe it's the Rugai. But basically, these obstacles were moved out of the way and thus enabled the papal spiritual monopoly. 538, the Ostrogoths received their death blow from the armies of Justinian, led by Belisarius. Now, they had a small comeback for a little while, but they were never quite the same after that 538 victory. And the time half times is 1,260 days or years. This is the day-year principle in prophecy. And so that would be from 538, that would bring us to 1798 when Pope Pius VI was taken prisoner by the armies of Napoleon, led by General Berthier. Pope Pius VI taken prisoner, 1798. So 538 to 1798 is 1,260 days. And so when we look in Revelation 11:2, 3, Revelation 12:6, Revelation 12:14, and 13:5, we could see that this period of time is referred to in different ways. It's referred to as a time, half time, or a year, 2 years, half a year. That's what that is. 1,260 days, or 42 months. Okay, so that's the period of time from 538 to 1798. And then with the rise of Napoleon and the Napoleonic dynasty came the end of the Holy Roman Empire, 1806, and Napoleon III's support for Italian unification, the Second War of Italian Independence. Well, this ended up in the end of the Papal States. So the papacy would end up losing its temporal power, and that was the deadly wound, beginning with Pope Pius VI taken prisoner, 1798, 538, 1798. That's the period of time. So the papacy had obtained this spiritual monopoly in Europe, but that death blow was 1798. And so after reading of this run of the papal system, this run of the papacy, this period of time where they continued on with this monopoly, spiritual monopoly. Yeah, they had challenges along the way, but they continued on until that death blow, 1798. That's the key. And so right after that, we read over here, but the court was seated. So this shows us that sometime After 1798, we have this investigative judgment. The court was seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Okay, the little horn would then be defeated after the investigative judgment. So you have an investigation, and then you have an execution, and then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So there again we see the sequence. So in that basic sequence we can clearly see the little horn, the activities of the little horn, and then after that we see this heavenly investigative judgment, and then we see the executive judgment and the everlasting kingdom. And so once again, parallel, investigative judgment, cleansing of the sanctuary. Now in Daniel chapter 8, starting verse 9, we read, out of one of them came a little horn. So there we see again, parallel image to the little horn in Daniel chapter 7, which grew exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east and toward the glorious land. And it grew up toward the host of heaven. So in verse 9, we have a horizontal, temporal conquest of the little horn. This is signifying pagan Rome. But then in verse 10, we see, and it grew up to the host of heaven, a vertical attack, a spiritual attack. This is representing papal Rome. And it cast down some of the hosts and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the hosts, and by him the daily sacrifices were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. So this is an attack on the heavenly sanctuary. An alternate system, an alternate sanctuary would seek to replace the true sanctuary of God and the true ministry of Christ as our high priest. So the Catholic system, confession to priests, the daily mass, okay, these things, this system was set up as an attack. Ultimately, Satan is behind it. Now, this is not to attack Catholic people. There are many sincere Catholics and sincere people of various denominations and even various religions. God weighs the motives of the heart. There are going to be people, by the grace of God, who are saved, who don't know all of these truths because God weighs the motives of the heart. But this is talking about the system. The system itself is a man-centered system. It puts tradition equal with the Bible, so-called apostolic tradition, but really Catholic tradition. It puts equal with the Bible, and then you have the magisterium, and it lowers the Word of God, and it's ultimately a man-centered system, a pope-centered system. And so it says, he even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, that's Christ. And by him the daily, and the word sacrifices is supplied. And that's referring to the daily intercessory ministry of Christ, were taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. You read Psalm 141, verse 2, and we see prayer joined with the incense. Or we see that as well in the book of Luke 1:10, prayer joined with the incense. And so the daily intercessory ministry of the Old Testament is ultimately pointing to the intercessory ministry of Christ. But I'm going to continue reading here in verse 12. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily. In other words, the papacy never had its own army, but it relied on the forces, on the armies, and the backing of civil powers. And he cast truth down to the ground. He did all this and prospered. And then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that certain one who was speaking, how long will the vision, and it says the vision, okay, it's the vision. Now the vision of chapter 8 actually starts with the ram symbolizing Medo-Persia, and then the goat symbolizing Greece comes on the scene. So how long will the vision be? So it would be at some time starting in the Medo-Persian time. That's the ram, the first symbolic image in the vision. How long will the vision be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation? And this is referring to the little horn's activities. The giving of both the sanctuary and the host to be trampled underfoot. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. 2,300 days. So we're talking about the rise and fall of empires. starting with Medo-Persian and Greece, then coming into Rome. And so it couldn't have been a literal 2,300 days, because that would be a little over 6 years. Now, in my recent discussion that I had with Sola Scriptura 21, one of the points that he was making was that the daily sacrifices, that was referring to the evening, morning sacrifice. Like I said, sacrifice is supplied. And I pointed this out in that discussion, that sacrifice is supplied. And so the entire daily ministry is being referred to. It's not just the sacrifices. And so one of the points that I was making there was no justification for saying, well, this is merely referring to the sacrifices. And so the argument that was being made by Sola Scriptura was that these 2,300 days, which in the Hebrew or in the original language is evening, morning. And so the argument was being made, well, this is just referring to the evening, morning sacrifice. That's what that is. That's the evening, morning sacrifice. And so he was saying that, so it's really only 1,150 days, because the evening, morning is referring to the evening, morning sacrifice. But as I had some interactions with scholar Richard Davidson, and he pointed me also to the writings, the dissertation of Martin Probstel, which I believe is called Truth and Terror. And I believe it's around 370 to 380 in that dissertation, where he speaks also about this. And one of the points that was brought out to me, which would actually have strengthened the point I was making, is that the evening, morning sacrifices, or rather, the daily sacrifices that took place, are always described as morning and evening, not evening and morning. This says evening and morning. Okay? They're never described as evening and morning, but rather morning and evening when we're talking about those daily sacrifices. So this wouldn't work. That argument doesn't work with this when we look at the linguistics. But when we go all the way back to the book of Genesis, chapter 1, we see evening, morning, day 1, evening, morning number. Day 2, evening, morning. So evening, morning is reminding us of the days of creation. And so once again, there's no justification. In fact, if we talk about the ceremonies related to the appointed times in the Jewish calendar, we could talk about the Day of Atonement and its rituals beginning in the evening, as is seen in Leviticus 23:32, I believe. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month at evening. So the rituals of the Day of Atonement would start in evening. But as far as the sacrifices, they are described as being morning and evening, not evening and morning. So once again, this language points to days of creation, evening, morning. But it does not point to the sacrifices that took place daily, because those were morning, evening. Anyway, that would have strengthened my argument, but my main point still stands, which is that there's no grounds, even if you argue that this is referring to the daily ministry, well, it doesn't use the word sacrifices, and so the daily ministry involved more than just the sacrifices. It involved the incense, it involved keeping the lamps trimmed and burning from the evening, Exodus 27:20 and 21. And so I had referred to evening there, but that was pointing to the dark part of the day, the evening part of the day. But we can clearly see this evening, morning language going back to the days of creation. So it's referring to days. And so in this New King James translation, it says days. So Daniel 8:25, through his cunning, we're talking about the little horn, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart, and he shall destroy many in their prosperity, and he shall even rise against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken without human means. Daniel 8:14, does it connect? Does the language connect to Leviticus chapter 16? This was another challenge raised by Dr. Davis, and so that's why I prepared this segment of the presentation as well. So in Daniel 8:14, we see, then shall be cleansed, and the word is sodak. Definition, to be just or to be righteous. So the sanctuary would be justified or made righteous, and this translation says cleanse, sodak. Strong 6663. In Job 25:4, we read, how then can man be righteous, sodak, before God, or how can he be pure, zohah, who is born of a woman? So now the word pure, and this is a parallel, is being made equivalent. As you can see, it is being made equivalent to sodak. So zohah and sodak are being made equivalent to one another. So we have a linguistic connection there. And then when we look further, we see the same thing in Job 15:14, two words being made equivalent. In Proverbs 20 verse 9, we see, who can say, I have made my heart clean, zohah. I am pure, hair, from my sin. Now this word pure, hair, which is used there to be clean, is being now made equivalent with zohah. So the two words are being made equivalent there. And so we see these three words are being equivalent to each other. And the Bible is showing us that. And so there is a connection between being justified and being purified and being clean and being made pure. And this word, toher, is the word that is used there in Leviticus 16:19. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times and cleanse, toher, it, and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. So we have this connection here. We have a linguistic connection as these words are made equivalent with one another. What is the connection between the 2,300 days and the 70 weeks? Well, long story short, Gabriel gave the 70-week prophecy. Gabriel gave that 70-week prophecy in order to help Daniel understand the 2,300-day prophecy. Like I said, the 2,300-day prophecy, that vision started with the ram representing Medo-Persia. That's where the vision started. Now, it is a vision of 2,300 days, but it starts with Medo-Persia. And so this 70-week prophecy starts with Medo-Persia, but gives us a specific time. Because by the end of Daniel chapter 7, or Daniel chapter 8 rather, Daniel didn't fully understand the vision, specifically the number aspect of the vision. Gabriel comes on the scene in verse 16 and 17 to help him understand. But by the end of the chapter 8, he doesn't understand. And that's why this prophecy is given. Now, Daniel chapter 9 has no vision in it. Daniel says a long prayer. His key concern is his own nation, his own people. He had understood from the prophet Jeremiah that the 70 years of desolation under Babylon had finished. But the Babylonian rule had come to an end, and now the Medo-Persians are in control. And so this is Daniel's concern because he had just learned about 2,300 years. When will my people return to their land? When will this happen? And so when he receives from Gabriel this 70-week prophecy, it gives him comfort because he learns, oh, okay, it's not going to be 2,300 years before your people return to the Holy Land. And so this first portion of the 2,300 years specifically gives comfort to Daniel. It specifically addresses his concern concerning his people, but it also pinpoints, it's also connected to the 2,300-day prophecy, and it pinpoints the beginning of it. Like the 2,300-day prophecy, it starts in the time of Medo-Persia, but it gives a specific point. Why would Gabriel, if Daniel didn't understand, if he still had questions by the end of chapter 8, why would Gabriel then give him another prophecy that had nothing to do with it? And so clearly, when he says, understand the vision in chapter 9, at the end of chapter 9, when he says to Daniel, understand the vision, this prophecy was to help him have a better understanding of the vision. What vision? There was no vision in chapter 9, and this prophecy at the end is not a vision, it's a prophecy. But the vision, starting with the ram and the goat, and in the little horn, that vision in chapter 8 was the vision that is being referred to there. Now Leviticus 16:30, on that day the priest shall make atonement for you, to cleanse you, that you may be clean. And so again, we see this connection here with these words. We see here is that word toher, right, in the Hebrew, toher, and it is being, and we have seen that it is related to sodak and to zohar. So you got to get that ha in there. But you can see that these words are made equivalent to one another. And there we see Leviticus 16:30. It is a cleansing of the sanctuary. It is a cleansing of the sanctuary. It is a justification of the sanctuary. And I'll talk a little more in the future in this series on the meaning of that. Daniel 8:14. Daniel 8:14 here. And he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. 2,300 days, okay? Then the sanctuary will be cleansed, or tzodak, will be justified. And Daniel 8:16, I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai who called and said, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. Make him understand the vision. Daniel 8:27. And I, Daniel, fainted, and I was sick for days afterward. I arose and I went about the king's business, and I was astonished by the vision, but none understood it. So he didn't understand by the end of the chapter, but Gabriel was to help him understand. And yet then in chapter 9, he's got that long prayer, and then once again it says, yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision. What vision? The vision of chapter 8. At the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, reached me about the time of the evening offering, and he informed me and talked with me, and he said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand at the beginning of your supplications the command went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore consider the matter and understand the vision. The vision is referring to the vision of chapter 8. Now in chapter 8, we see that the ram which you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece. And so the vision starts during the time of Medo-Persia. And the large horn that is between its eye is the first king. In other words, the horn also can be thought of as, it represents a king or a kingdom, but we could also think of it in the context of in the context of seeing the horn on a beast there, we could also think of the horn as representing a center of power. And so Alexander really was he was really what motivated the kingdom of Greece to conquer enemies, Alexander the Great. And so he's represented as that horn. And the king is synonymous with kingdom. Just like in chapter 2 of Daniel, when Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. He says to King Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. So gold was representing there. You had the four elements, the four metals rather, four metals representing the four kingdoms. And so Daniel is basically making the king equivalent with the kingdom. He says, you are the head of gold, but then after you will come another kingdom. In Daniel 8:26, the vision of the evenings and mornings, which is told is true. Therefore, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. How can it refer to many days in the future if it's to be taken as a literal 2,300 days? Or as Sola Scriptura 21 and others who are in agreement with him would say, well, it was only 1,150 days. Well, how could that be many days in the future? The vision starts during the time of Medo-Persia. So that wouldn't really work. That wouldn't make sense. But let's continue here. When exactly does the 2,300 begin and end? Daniel 9:24 and 25. 70 weeks are determined for your people. So this is helping to establish the starting point. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, that's referring to Christ, there shall be 7 weeks. 7 weeks, that's 49 days, 49 years. And 62 weeks. So even in the context of this prophecy, many Christians agree this is referring to years. And so since this prophecy is to help understand the 2,300 days, clearly those are years. And 62 weeks would be 434 years. Put them together, 483 years. The street shall be built, and the wall, even in troublesome times. So Ezra 7, 6 through 9, shows us when that going forth of the command to restore, and it's important to point out that the word restore there is not the same as build. It's not two ways of saying build. Restore is referring to restoring to the Jewish nation their authority. And that's what this decree of Artaxerxes did. This Ezra came up from Babylon, and he was a skilled scribe in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given. The king granted him all his requests, according to the hand of the Lord his God upon him. Some of the children of Israel, the priests, the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, the Nethinim, came up to Jerusalem in the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. So it's the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. In the book by scholar Richard Davis, in A Song for the Sanctuary, page 589, it says, the date for Artaxerxes' reign are firmly established by numerous lines of evidence. There's the classical historical, the Egyptian astronomical source, a Babylonian astronomical source, the Egypto-Jewish historical source, the Elephantine Papyrus. You can go more in the weeds of that. His book has sources, and so you can go further in that. Xerxes died, and his son Artaxerxes ascended the throne near the end of 465 BC, sometime after December 17th or in early January 464. So 65 or 64. Jewish reckoning of regnal years was fall to fall. And so basically this regnal year recognition or civil year reckoning would be from fall to fall. So it would start in the 7th month, unlike the religious year, which would start in the 1st month. And so that makes sense of Nehemiah 1:1 and 2:1 for when you have the fall to fall reckoning. And so there was in this period of time, in the period of time of Ezra, Ascension year reckoning. So Ascension year was counted as 0, the year 0. And so starting in the fall of 65, because that's when the regnal year would be recognized, the civil year would be recognized as starting in fall. So fall 65, most of 64 would be year 0. That's when the reign of Artaxerxes would be counted, and his ascension year would start. His year 0 would be in the fall of 65 and to the fall of 64. That would be year 0. And so when we count forward and we go forward, we end up with his 7th year, from fall of 58, most of 57, to the fall of 57. And so that would be the 7th year of King Artaxerxes. And Ezra 7:9 says, on the first day of the first month, he began his journey from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month, he came to Jerusalem. So that would be July, August. So July, August of 57, he got to Jerusalem. Which appointed times were coming? Well, what were the appointed times coming? The new moon, which is the beginning of every month, Rosh Chodesh. And then you have trumpets, atonement, and tabernacle. So those were the appointed times that were coming when Ezra had arrived, because he arrived there in July, as we see, July, August. So these would be the approaching appointed sacred times in the Jewish calendar. Now, AD 27 and AD 34 were sabbatical years, according to Song for the Sanctuary 594, page 594. And so we have 490 years or 10 Jubilee cycles. A Jubilee would happen every 49 years. On the 50th year, which would be the beginning of the next cycle, that would be the Jubilee year, and it would start on the Day of Atonement of the 50th year, as we could see here in Leviticus 25, 8 through 10. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7th Sabbaths of years shall be for you 49 years. So you'd have a sabbatical year every 7 years. At 7 times 7 would be 49. And so that would be the Jubilee cycle. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, you shall make the trumpet sound throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year. So the Jubilee year would start with the Day of Atonement, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land and all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. So the 50th year was the first year of the next sabbatical and jubilee cycle, according to the Andrews commentary. So the first activity of the returnees, according to the decree, is now therefore be careful to buy with this money bulls, rams, and lambs, with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and offer them on the altar of the house of the Lord your God. So this would be the first activity. And when would that activity happen? Now, the number of before I get into that, the number of sacrifices were in multiples of 12 or 7, meant to represent all Israel. 12, obviously 12 tribes, 7 representing totality, perfection, completeness. Only the Feast of Trumpets, Numbers 29:2, and Atonement, 29:8, and the 8th day of the Feast of Tabernacles, Numbers 29:36, required 1 bull. And so since Ezra 8:35 mentions 12 bulls for the 12 tribes, a feast with 1 bull must fit. So it's got to be one of these days. Okay, in other words, a feast with 2 bulls, if you're doing it for the 12 tribes, it'd have to be 24. So you need a 1 bull feast, and that's what these autumn holy times required. And so it fits. It's got to be one of these appointed times in the 7th month. Atonement sacrifices. When we look at Numbers 29, 8, and 11, we see, and you shall present a bull offering to the Lord, a sweet aroma, 1 young bull, 1 ram, 7 lambs in their first year. Be sure they are without blemish. Also 1 kid of the goats, and a sin offering besides the sin offering for atonement, the regular burnt offerings with its grain offering, and their drink offerings. Ezra 8:35, the children, so we're looking at Ezra now, and the going forth of the command, the children of those who had been carried away captive, who had come from the captivity, offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel. And so what do we see? We see 12 bulls for all Israel. 96 rams, 77 lambs, and 12 male goats. 12 male goats. And as a sin offering. So we see the same animals there as in atonement sacrifices. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord. Now the 8th day of tabernacles doesn't work because there's no mention of sacrifices offered the other 7. Ezra repeatedly mentions the first day of the month. The first day of the first month and the first day of the 5th month, for example, are mentioned in Ezra 7:9, and of the first month in 10:17. So it seems to disqualify trumpets because that would have been a first day of the month. But since Ezra had the habit of mentioning when the first day of the month happened, that would disqualify the Day of Trumpets, the Feast of Trumpets. The Day of Atonement, Jubilee year begins. Fasting and confession for sins, Leviticus 16, 29 to 31. Well, we see that in Ezra 9, 5 to 15. Israel was returning to its possession. So the Day of Atonement makes sense. The beginning of the Jubilee year makes perfect sense. When is the going forth? The going forth into effect, as we see, Ezra 8:35, the children of those who had been carried away captive, who had come from the captivity, offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, 12 bulls for all Israel, 96 rams, 77 lambs, and 12 male goats as a sin offering. All this was a burnt offering to the Lord, and so it would have been right in the 7th month. That's when the going forth would happen, and as the evidence points to, the Day of Atonement. And so here we see that the decree went forth in the fall, in the beginning of the Jewish New Year, in the first month of the civil year, in the 7th, which would be the 7th month in the Jewish calendar. That would have been when the going forth would have when the going forth would have happened. And so we start here. And so it also fits with what I mentioned before, that 27 AD and 34 AD were sabbatical years. So remember, every 7 years was a sabbatical year. Every 7 years was a sabbatical year. Now, just a note, as I pointed out earlier, that the going forth of the commandment in the fall of 457 BC on the Day of Atonement was understood to have been a Jubilee year. And so that would have been the beginning of a Jubilee cycle of 49 years. And a Jubilee cycle of 49 years is obviously 7 sabbatical cycles. Okay? So a Jubilee cycle would end with a sabbatical year. And so it makes sense that 10 Jubilee cycles would end with a sabbatical year. And so Richard Davidson pointed out that 34 AD would have been a sabbatical year. So that would have been 490 years, which would be 10 Jubilee cycles or 70 sabbatical cycles.
If for the final week I would submit to you as AD 26, only because the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, you have to consider the year of accession to the throne. He has a co-regency that began in AD 12 with his brother, and then he became full regent in AD 14. So you count 12, 13, and you arrive at 26.
Now, what about 27 AD? Continuing. Luke 3:1. Now in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, Pontius Pilate being governor of Judea, Herod being tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and the region of Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene. Now in this period of time, in the 1st century, there was non-ascension year reckoning. So they didn't have the recognizing the year 0. Non-ascension year reckoning for foreign rulers, but still fall-to-fall reckoning, Song for the Sanctuary 608. Josephus is one of the references used to show that they had the fall to fall reckoning and the non-ascension year reckoning mentioned in the Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 5, 244, 247. So 14 AD would have been sole rulership, August 19th. Therefore, the first year starts reckoning from before in the Jewish year, reckoned from fall 13 AD to fall 14 AD. And so the fall new year of 14 AD would have been when the second year would have been recognized to start. And then the third year starts in the fall of 15 AD. So year one is going to be counted as the full year from fall to fall, starting with 13 AD. And when you calculate it, the 15th year would be 27 AD.
Moreover, there was no Friday crucifixion in AD 31, but in AD
crucifixion?
Yeah.
Friday crucifixion.
Correct. In AD 31 is the typical Adventist answer. You will not
what
find
do you mean
AD
Friday crucifixion?
Well, that's the Passover.
Oh, you mean Passover? You mean Passover?
Yeah.
But you're going by astronomical reckoning. In
I'm
other
going
words,
by the lunar reckoning and the solar reckoning.
Yeah, but that would only give you the astronomical full moon.
Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't rely on the Naval Observatory to say that time has never changed and then not rely on them or a Jewish calendar to tell you when the Passover was in AD 30.
Yeah, I think it's different because basically when the sun goes down and the sun rises, that's observable to anybody. When a day ends and another day begins. But what the Jews did in that period of time, I'm not sure if they still do it, is they would count the month from when they would see the first sliver of the new moon. They wouldn't go by the astronomical new moon, which is when you don't see the moon at all.
No, they counted it by the first sliver.
This first sliver, which would actually be a little bit after the astronomical new moon. So that would push everything a little further back. That would push the 14th day back.
Well, that depends. There's the rabbinic calendar, and we don't have time to get into it, or the Karaite calendar. And I don't find much justification or substantiation of the latter simply because, well, it would take me a lot to go into it right now.
Yeah, that's
I don't want to open up my head for that.
Ancient Jews would reckon the beginning of the month not by astronomical new moon, but by the appearance of the first sliver of the waxing crescent moon. This was to address AllenDavis's point of saying that the Passover just would have been, it wouldn't have fit in 31 AD. If you go by the astronomical reckoning, it wouldn't have fit in 31 AD. Okay? But if you go by the Jewish reckoning, they recognize the month as beginning not with the astronomical new moon, but with the appearance of the first sliver of the waxing crescent moon. Rosh Chodesh, new moon. The Jewish month begins with the first sighting of the new moon, the Rosh Chodesh. Okay, so this is from a Jewish source. And at the end of the 29.5-day cycle, the moon reemerges as a narrow crescent. This, I said narrow crescent. No, a crescent. No, the narrow crescent. This is called the new moon, and it indicates a new Jewish month has begun. In the Talmud, Rabbi Yochanan compared a person who blesses the new moon in its appointed time with one who greeted God himself. Astronomical new moon, not the same as ancient Rosh Chodesh. In astronomy, the new moon is the first lunar phase when the moon and the sun have the same elliptic longitude. At this phase, the lunar disk is not visible to the naked eye except when it is silhouetted against the sun during a solar eclipse. The Jewish calendar is based on the lunar cycles. Toward the beginning of the moon cycle, it appears as a thin crescent. That is the signal for a new Jewish month. The moon grows until it is full the middle of the month, and then it begins to wane until it cannot be seen. It remains invisible for approximately 2 days, and then the thin crescent reappears, and the cycle begins again. Again, this is a Jewish source. The lunar month on the Jewish calendar begins when the first sliver of the moon becomes visible after the dark of the moon. Note that this is different from the astronomical definition of new moon, which would more accurately be called no moon, the darkest point of the cycle. Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, occurs a day or two after the astronomical new moon, when the moon is first visible. And so, taking that into consideration, Passover would have fallen right at the right time in 31 AD. And so that was to address one of the points that AllenDavis was making, that in 31 AD, if you go by the astronomical, then it wouldn't work. But if you go by the actual Jewish reckoning and you consider that they would start the month not with the astronomical new moon or no moon, but when the first sliver of the new moon would seem, that push everything a little back further, and 31 AD would work out. Well, that was the first part of this series, which is based on the presentation I put together when I was preparing for my first discussion with AllenDavis. I think the discussion went very well. Of course, I left a lot out, but this was the presentation that I had in mind during that discussion. And so stay tuned for part 2. God bless.